Welcome, everyone. This is Angie. I'm from the Country Bookshop in Southern Pines, North Carolina. Southern Pines, if you don't know where it is about an hour south of Raleigh and about 4 hours east of where Alan is in Asheville. So we welcome you to our Crowdcast event with Alan Gratz today. We love Alan's books. We've been fans from the very beginning, way back when Samurai Shortstop.
Samurai Shortstop, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, when it was brand new, we were already Alan Gratz fans. So we've been watching Alan hit the Battle of the Books list, and then now the New York Times bestseller list. So, well, Alan, welcome to Country Bookshop virtually. And
thank you, Angie. Yeah.
Thanks for being here today.
It's great to be back, at least virtually. I miss getting down there. It seems like I'm down in Southern Pines at least once a year, sometimes more than that. And I love getting down there and visiting you guys. And I think of all the places I didn't get to go last year because of COVID. You guys are definitely right up there for places I missed going. And so I'm glad to at least be able to visit you virtually now and to visit your schools virtually.
Well, we're glad to have you here. The schools we are supporting or that are joining us today from Country Bookshop are Scotland County Schools, not too far from us, Uwharrie Academy in Ashboro, and Elisa Middle School in Robbins. So we welcome them.
Nice. Yeah, shout out to them. And we're being joined by people from all over the country and up in Canada as well. I took a quick glance beforehand, and this may have even changed. We've had something like 30 or 40 people sign up since I looked. But we've got people from Florida, South Carolina, Georgia, Virginia, Pennsylvania, New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Ohio, Michigan, Missouri, Tennessee, Minnesota, Louisiana, Texas. I hope you guys are doing okay down there in Texas. And I'm glad. I hope you're able to watch us live. I hope that you're warm and staying safe. Colorado, New Mexico, Los Angeles in California, Portland in Oregon, Washington State, Idaho, and we got people from Ontario and British Columbia in Canada, and of course, tons and tons of people from our home state, North Carolina.
That's one of the great things. Someone mentioned yesterday, what are some of the wonderful things that have happened through COVID?
Yeah.
And I think one of the most wonderful things is that we've been able to meet very easily, very conveniently with people from all over the country and share our love of books and great authors, just, right here in our own children's department or our own living rooms.
Or my own writing office, right? Yeah. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we wish everyone was well and that no one had gotten sick or anything from COVID. But there are things that have changed about the way we live and the way we do things. And maybe we'll carry some of those forward. And maybe we'll be able to do this. I hope I can get back down there in person, but I also hope to continue to do virtual events like this for the foreseeable future, even post-pandemic, so that we can have all these different people with us, because I can't get everywhere, unfortunately.
That's right. And we could tell everybody, usually when you visit North Carolina, we have some kind of weather tragedy.
Yes.
And today, I was going to sit outside because it is absolutely beautiful and sunny, but we've done hurricane, we've done snowstorm.
I think we had a snowstorm.
Yeah. But today's beautiful. So maybe our virtual events are good luck for us as far as
we've had flooding, that was, I think, separate from the hurricane. We had
flooding, that's right.
We had super flooding where, I couldn't even get to some of the schools. I think they were flooded out. And that was all different events. So yes, I enjoy your nice day because I'm not there. That's yeah.
You're always here in our hearts.
Well, at least I didn't bring the weather with me this time. So I will give another shout out to the Country Bookshop. I love the Country Bookshop. As Angie said, they have been very supportive of me since the very start of my career. I've been going down there. I say down there because geographically from where I am in the state, since the very beginning. And I love that you're the whole area around Southern Pines. And if you guys when you hear about Ground Zero today, or if you're interested in any of my other books, there is a button down at the bottom that says Buy Alan's Books from the Country Bookshop in Southern Pines, North Carolina. And when you click on that, it will take you to their website where you can purchase one of my books. And Angie, did you guys get some of the signed book plates from me? I don't know if you have any of those.
I don't think we have any yet.
Okay, I can certainly send you some. I can send you some signed book plates, and that way you guys can have some of those to put into books as well. But But when you support a great local indie like Country Bookshop, what do you get? You get more events like this. So if you live around the Country Bookshop, you get their amazing store to go in and shop in, and you get authors like me brought to your area. And if you don't even live around Country Bookshop, but live in one of those other states or countries that I listed, you get events like this where you get to tune in and join us. So any support you can throw their way. You know how hard it is for most brick and mortar businesses during the pandemic, and bookstores have been hit just as hard as everybody else. So helping them out will make sure they're still around after we're back to normal. And so I just love you guys and hope people will help support you.
Thank you, Alan. We appreciate that. We love you too.
Totally. For everybody else, just as a reminder to all of your schools, Angie, and to everybody else watching, if you have friends who weren't able to make it, or if you're a teacher and you see some of your students aren't on the call, this is being recorded and it will be available after the fact, like seconds after it's done. It appears, and you can still sign up for it after the event. So you can still sign up and watch it. You didn't have to pre-sign up just to see the recording. So remember to tell your friends and your students out there, and Angie, you can tell customers that they're still able to watch it. And that buy button will continue to work too. So you guys can wait until after the show is over to go buy a book.
All good things.
Yeah. So I think with that is all the admin and business I need to take care of. We will see you back again at the end, Angie, and I will get on with the presentation.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. See you soon. All right. So, hey, guys, welcome. Thank you again so much for being with us. I am Alan Gratz. I'm the author of all these books, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about one of those in particular as we go along. But first, let me tell you a little bit more about myself. I was born and raised in Knoxville, Tennessee, and I went to the University of Tennessee to study creative writing because I knew from when I was very young, probably the age of a lot of you guys, or even younger than that I wanted to grow up and be a writer. So I graduated and I did a lot of other jobs that had to do with writing and had to do with books while I worked on writing my own stories. And then in 2006, I got my very first book published, that book that Angie and I were talking about, Samurai Shortstop, the one up there in the corner. And I've really been lucky to have about a book a year come out ever since then. Now, I don't live in Knoxville, Tennessee anymore. As Angie mentioned, I live in a little town called Asheville in Western North Carolina. And this is my full-time job. I get to wake up in the morning. I get to come downstairs here to my office, which is just another room in my house. And I get to work on writing books all day long. And I think it's pretty much the greatest job in the world. So like I said, I'm going to talk about one book in particular today. We're going to have a question and answer session that starts in about 25 minutes from now. It takes me about 25 minutes to do the presentation on Ground Zero. So if you have a question about Ground Zero, hang on to it. If you have a question about any of my other books, that's cool too, or about writing in general, hang on to those. And there will be a time when you guys can submit questions. So just be ready for that. In the meantime, I'm going to focus on the screen here so you guys can see my pictures from Ground Zero, and then I will come back larger when we are ready to do the questions and the answers. Okay, so the book I'm talking about today is Ground Zero. It is brand new. It came out this month, like on February 2nd, and it is a story of 9/11. The thing that everyone seems to remember the most about the morning of September 11th, 2001, is how blue and cloudless the sky was in New York City that day. On September 11, 2001, I was an 8th grade English teacher in Knoxville, Tennessee. That's a picture of me up there at the top. That picture was not taken on September 11th. We had a lot of other things to worry about that day. But that was taken that same year. That's me at my desk in my classroom. I was a teacher. My wife and I, my wife, Wendy, that's us in the bottom picture. We had actually been to New York earlier in 2001, and we had gone up to the top of the World Trade Center for an event at Windows on the World, the restaurant at the very top of the North Tower. That's us on that trip, not at the top of the World Trade Center, which we visited later that night from when that picture was taken, but that's us at the top of the Empire State Building. We went on a lot of sightseeing things when we were in New York. But that was before September. That was earlier in the year. I think it was around February. It was about this time of the year. And but let's get back to September 11th, 2001. That day was a Tuesday. And back at my school in Tennessee, we had just started our first class of the day when news of the attack started filtering into our classrooms. So you have to understand that this was before Twitter. It was before Facebook. It was before most people had cell phones. I didn't get my first cell phone until 2002 when my wife was pregnant and we wanted to make sure she could reach me wherever I was. And nobody's cell phone was a smartphone, not back then. So we couldn't just check social media to see what was happening. Instead, my school pulled all the students out of class and we assembled in the gym where we wheeled in blurry TVs with bad reception as all of us, teachers and students, struggled to understand what was going on in New York City. What we saw played out on an endless loop because nobody knew anything else or had any other video to show, was the North Tower of the World Trade Center burning and smoking from a jet plane crashing into it. Everyone thought it was just a horrible accident until a second plane came flying in and slammed into the South Tower, this time while everyone was watching. In Ground Zero, you'll see what that looked like from the inside, as survivors in the North Tower watch in horror as the second plane hits and a fireball erupts from the South Tower. Back in 2001, as we watched this happening on live television, we realized this clearly was not an accident. Someone was doing this on purpose. Without social media to turn to, we turned to the people next to us with the questions that we were all asking. What was going on? Why would someone do this? Would there be more attacks? Were we now at war? And with whom? That confusion is a big part of my book, Ground Zero. In the South Tower, before the second plane hit, workers were told that the plane hitting the North Tower was an accident and that they could all stop evacuating and go back to their offices. In both towers, survivors calling 911 were told to stay where they were and not try to get out of the burning buildings until the fire department could get there. When the Twin Towers collapsed, less than 2 hours later, there was only one thing we all knew for certain. Nothing would ever be the same. An estimated 14,000 to 17,500 people were in the World Trade Center complex at the time of the attacks. Miraculously, most of the people below the impact zones survived. Even so, the number of dead and wounded is still horrifying. 2,977 people died in the attacks on the World Trade Center, and another 25,000 people were injured. Numbers which include many first responders like police officers, firefighters, and emergency medical personnel. The September 11th attacks remain the single deadliest terrorist attack in human history. As the day went on, we learned there had been other attacks as well. Terrorists had flown a third plane into the Pentagon building, the headquarters of the United States Department of Defense in Arlington, Virginia, just outside Washington, D.C. The impact killed all 64 people on board, including the 5 hijackers, and another 125 victims inside the building. A fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was hijacked just after the second plane hit the South Tower. When the passengers on Flight 93 used phones on the planes to call their families, they learned about the attacks on the Twin Towers and the Pentagon, and they knew their plane would be next. A group of brave passengers stormed the cockpit to try to wrestle control of the airplane away from the terrorists. And during the struggle, Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania, killing everyone on board. No one knows the exact target of Flight 93, but the White House and the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. are likely possibilities. I don't tell the stories of Flight 93 and the attack on the Pentagon in Ground Zero because I wanted to tell the story of a kid inside the Twin Towers at the very moment of the attacks. And there's no way he would have known what was happening at the same time in Virginia and Pennsylvania. None of us really understood what had happened until later that night or even days later. I show what happened that day in the Twin Towers in Ground Zero. young readers have been asking me for years to write a book about 9/11, and I finally decided to do it for this year because 2021 is the 20th anniversary of the September 11th terrorist attacks. Ground Zero, then, is the story of two different kids. The first is 9-year-old Brandon, who is in the World Trade Center on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Brandon is already in trouble. He got into a fight in the first week of school defending a friend against a bully, and now he's suspended. He and his dad live alone, so Brandon has to go to work with his dad at Windows on the World, the restaurant at the very top of the North Tower of the World Trade Center, up on the 107th floor. This is that restaurant my wife and I went to earlier that year. It's a place that was famous for its incredible views, as you guys can see in the picture here. Brandon's in trouble with his dad and his school, but he has a plan to fix things, starting with sneaking out of the restaurant and taking an elevator all the way down to the mall in the basement of the World Trade Center. Because the Twin Towers, I should say, were so tall, they couldn't have every elevator car go up and down all 107 floors. If you were on the 10th floor, you could wait forever for a car if all the elevators are being used to move people around the top floors. Each of the Twin Towers had one express elevator that went from the lobby to the top without stopping, zooming from the ground to the 107th floor in just 60 seconds. But all the other elevators worked in local batches of 30 or 40 floors, with places called sky lobbies on the 44th and 78th floors where the different zones were connected. All told, each tower had 99 elevators. In my story, Brandon would prefer to get on that express elevator and zoom down to the mall beneath the building, but he's trying to get away before his dad sees him go. So he jumps in the first elevator that comes along, one of those local elevators that will take him down to the next sky lobby. But Brandon has only made it a few floors when, boom, terrorists drive a jet plane into the building above him, cutting him off from his dad. Now, Brandon has to figure out how to survive and see if there's a way he can save his dad too. I could have just written a book about a boy surviving in the North Tower on September 11, 2001. But the message of that day was, Muslim terrorists are coming to kill us. And that day they were. But that's not what has happened in the 20 years since 9/11. There are new, more pressing threats to our country, as we've all seen. Pandemics, racism, climate change, domestic terrorism, and that's just the start. But 9/11 was so scarring to Americans that much of our security focus as a country 20 years later is still built on this idea that Muslim terrorists are coming to kill us. Since 9/11, there have been hundreds of attacks on Middle Eastern Americans at American mosques, bans on refugees and immigrants from predominantly Muslim countries, new laws that allow the American government to spy on its own citizens, and restrictions and limitations on travel. And of course, perhaps the biggest consequence of 9/11 is the war in Afghanistan, which began the month after the terrorist attacks and is still going on. People often call the Korean War America's forgotten war. If that's true, then the war in Afghanistan might be called America's ignored war. The war in Afghanistan has been going on for more than 19 years. There are young soldiers for the United States fighting in Afghanistan who weren't even born when the U.S. invaded in October of 2001. But most Americans largely ignore the fact that we're even still at war. Why? In part because the war in Afghanistan is a new kind of war, fought largely from the air with attack helicopters and unmanned drones, and from the ground alongside military contractors and native Afghan soldiers trained by the United States. At the height of the war, 2010, 498 U.S. soldiers died in 1 year. Last year, in 2020, only 9 U.S. soldiers died. Even so, almost 2,400 American soldiers have died in Afghanistan since the war began, and more than 20,000 have been wounded. By contrast, more than 65,000 members of the Afghan National Army, our allies in Afghanistan, the people we've trained and who fight alongside us, have died. And an estimated 40,000 Afghan civilians have been killed by both sides in the war. And estimates vary, but the financial cost of the war in Afghanistan is thought to be close to $975 billion. The war in Afghanistan is now the longest war in U.S. history, and it's still going on. I knew if I was going to write about 9/11 20 years later, I was going to have to tell the story of what has happened since then, including the war in Afghanistan. So the second kid in my story is Reshmina, an 11-year-old Afghan girl experiencing her own 9/11 in the present day as her village becomes a battleground between the United States and the Taliban. One of the things that surprised me in my research for Eastern Afghanistan is that many villages are built on hillsides like this one. Good flat farmland is scarce in the mountainous eastern part of the country, so they save that for their crops, and they build their villages up the steep mountains above their farms. Reshmina's village in Ground Zero looks something like this, with houses stacked on top of each other and winding paths working their way up from the valley below. Reshmina's native language in Afghanistan is Pashto, but her English is very good, and she's hoping to get a job as a teacher or a translator to help her family. So when American soldiers visit her village for the first time, she's excited to try out her English skills. But almost as soon as they've arrived, the Americans are attacked by the Taliban, a group of fighters who follow an extreme interpretation of Islam and want all foreigners gone from Afghanistan. Even though it's dangerous, Reshmina's family takes one of the wounded American soldiers into their home to protect him, something that really happened to an American Navy SEAL whose team was ambushed by the Taliban in 2005. But Reshmina's twin brother Pasoon blames the United States for their older sister's death in one of those drone attacks I talked about earlier, and he runs away to tell the Taliban where to find the wounded American soldier. Now, Reshmina has to go after her brother and try to stop him before the Taliban come back and destroy her village. Like September 11th and the war in Afghanistan, Reshmina and Brandon are connected. Both will have to make impossible decisions along the way where something bad will happen no matter what they choose to do. And each will try to take on the extreme challenges that face them alone, but come to learn that the only way they can survive, the only way any of us can survive, I think, is when we work together and not against each other. And besides the parallels in their stories, Brandon and Reshmina are connected too, across the decades and the thousands of miles that separate them. But to find out what that connection is, you've got to read the book. Sorry, I can't give you all the spoilers today. So, with all the other things going on in the world, why revisit 9/11? Why now? Well, besides the anniversary this year, I want to show young readers who were born after 9/11 what happened that day and how America has changed since September 11th. But 9/11 still looms large in the American psyche 20 years later. It's used as a benchmark now. What I mean is, it's something we compare other events to measure just how horrible they are. In the past few months, I've seen new references to 9/11. At the end of December, we started to see headlines like this, comparing the daily deaths from the COVID pandemic to how many people died on September 11th. At the end of 2020, more people were dying every single day from COVID than died overall in the 9/11 terrorist attacks. And look, because of 9/11, we will forever have to take off our shoes at airports and have our bodies scanned and make sure our shampoo fits in 3.4-ounce bottles. And people complain about the restrictions and the long lines at airport security, but we do it because we're still afraid of terrorists hijacking airplanes. At the same time, there are millions of Americans who refuse to wear masks in public, even though it would save 100 times the number of people who died on 9/11. And I know that I watched the attack on our Capitol this past January with the same kind of horror and distress that I felt the day I watched the Twin Towers come down in 2001. And I'm not alone. Headlines and news reports couldn't help but draw comparisons. And look, let's go back to September 11th. On September 11th, 2001, 40 passengers and crew on board Flight 93, that story I told you, sacrificed their lives to keep their plane from crashing into the United States Capitol. On January 6, 2021, last month, hundreds of domestic terrorists did what the Muslim terrorists failed to do in 2001, attacking the Capitol and threatening the lives of everyone in Congress. Historically, 9/11 has been compared to other disasters too, like the Space Shuttle Challenger explosion and surprise attacks like the one on Pearl Harbor in World War II. Not for the number of dead, but for what those events did to the heart and soul of this country. And yet, for all that we remember and still feel the pain of 9/11, we as a country do everything we can to not talk about it. The trailer for the original 2002 Spider-Man movie had an amazing scene where Spidey catches a runaway helicopter in a web between the Twin Towers. If you look at that picture on the left, you can see in the glare from the sun peeking around the tower, you can see there's a little brown speck in the air. That's the helicopter that's caught in the web. It's just, with the sun behind it. It's an amazing scene. And if you look in Spidey's right eye, you can see the Twin Towers reflected there in his mask. But this trailer was immediately yanked from theaters and never seen again. The animators of the 2002 Disney movie Lilo and Stitch had to scramble to redo the third act of their film too, which originally had Stitch flying a Boeing 747 airplane through the skyscrapers of downtown Honolulu. That image in the top corner was in the original version of the movie, and it never made it to theaters. But just seeing that airplane flying among those skyscrapers, I still get chills looking at that because of 9/11. The animators switched the airplane out for Stitch's spaceship in the final cut of the movie, and they switched out the whole city of Honolulu for natural canyons to take it out of that same city feeling that New York had. References to the Twin Towers were removed from dozens of movies and TV shows, including Zoolander, Men in Black 2, and Stuart Little 2. TV versions of Back to the Future took out all references to terrorists, as did the 2002 re-release of E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And exploding or collapsing buildings were taken out of movies like Deep Impact, The Time Machine, The Incredibles, Monsters, Inc., and even an extremely goofy movie, whether those buildings were the Twin Towers or not. The DVD for the 1976 King Kong movie, which originally showed King Kong straddling the Twin Towers, which he climbs in the movie. You can see that cover over there on the left. He's standing up on top of the Twin Towers. That DVD was immediately recalled from stores, and the DVD was reissued with the new cover image on the right that did not have the Twin Towers in it. And the Twin Towers are still being removed from movies and TV shows. Just this past holiday season in 2020, a reshowing of Home Alone 2 removed scenes of Kevin visiting the World Trade Center. And nothing traumatic even happens in that scene. There's no chase scene or anything. He just goes up there to look around, but they still cut it out of the movie. Why are adults in America so uncomfortable talking about 9/11 that we can't even look at pictures of the Twin Towers? Partly, I think, because we didn't get closure. Closure is the feeling that an emotional or traumatic experience has been resolved. We didn't quite get that for 9/11. It took us 10 years after the attacks to find Osama bin Laden, the lead orchestrator of the attacks. And when we did find him, he was shot and killed and his body was dumped in the ocean. We didn't get to see him on trial. We didn't get to see him be punished for what he did. There were other men responsible for plotting the 9/11 terrorist attacks too, and we've captured a lot of them. But 20 years later, they are still awaiting trial at the U.S. military base in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba. Meanwhile, the United States officially remains in a national state of emergency due to 9/11, despite more pressing problems. And the seemingly endless war in Afghanistan continues. For many Americans, 9/11 isn't entirely over. But the biggest reason adults don't like to talk about September 11th, I think, is that 9/11 is still such a painful memory for so many of us. I thought that I had gotten past a lot of the pain and anger I felt that day, and in the weeks and months after 9/11. But it all came back when I was researching and writing Ground Zero. But I think it's important for us as adults to talk about 9/11 with young readers so you understand why that memory is still so raw for so many of us. The World Trade Center was eventually rebuilt, providing some measure of closure. The new One World Trade Center building officially replaced the Twin Towers in 2014. Nearby is the National September 11th Memorial and Museum, with 2 square reflecting pools sunk into the ground to mark the outlines of where the Twin Towers once stood. 2021 will mark the 20th anniversary of 9/11. Will it also mark the 20-year anniversary of the war in Afghanistan? Time will tell. One way or another, we still live in a world reshaped and redefined by what happened in those 102 frightful minutes on a bright blue September morning in 2001. I hope you will read my book about September 11th, Ground Zero, to see what happened that day and how we got from there to where we are today. So I'm going to come back now and share the screen with the book cover. Here I come. And I will remind you that if you are now, you've got to get your hands on a copy of Ground Zero. A great place to do that is by clicking on that button at the bottom that will take you to the Country Bookshop's website, where you can order your very own copy of Ground Zero. In the meantime, it's time for some questions. So we're going to open up a button at the bottom that says ask a question. Boom, there it came right there. You can go in there and you can type in your question. Now, here's the deal. When you go on there to type a question and if there's a bunch of others already typed in there, look first and see if somebody else has asked the same question that you want to have answered. If somebody has, don't type yours in again. Instead, upvote that person's question, because I will see the questions that get the most votes and I will answer those first. The way this works is that usually by the time the session runs out at the top of the hour, we've got like 50 questions and there's no way I could get to all of them. So I have to pick the ones that are the most popular. So vote for your favorite questions down there in the Ask a Question, and make sure that if you have a question you have a burning question you want to get answered, make sure that if somebody else has asked it, you just vote for their question to go up to the top instead of typing yours in again, because I might not see it. Okay, we've already got a boatload of questions coming in, so let's get right to it. Woo! Here's one with 53 votes already. Tyler asks, what is your favorite book of all the books that I've written? Thank you, Tyler, for the question. I think my favorite book that I've written of all mine is Project 1065. I love all my books, or I wouldn't have written them, because it takes so long to write a book that you'd get sick of it I already get sick of it. And if I didn't like the book, I would just say, forget it. But Project 1065 is my absolute favorite because it has real history in it. It's got action and adventure. It's got twists and turns. It's got betrayals. It's got surprises. And it has some humor to it, too. I got to put jokes in Project 1065, which I don't always get to do. I do try to put humor in my books as much as I can, but I've written about some pretty hard stuff. I've written about terrorism. I've written about the Holocaust. I've written about refugees and war. So my characters aren't always like having a ball of laughs, right? So I don't always get to put jokes in there. There's still serious and heavy stuff that happens in Project 1065 as well, but there was a little bit more room for jokes in there. So I got to put that in there. So I think probably my favorite book that I've written is Project 1065. But like I said, I love all my books, and I think you will too. Thank you, Tyler. That is a great question. Let's see what else we got here. So Kevin asks, how do you go about the process of writing a book? How do you develop the raw idea? Another great question. Thank you, Kevin. Okay, so for me, I start with an idea. Like I'll say, like, this year's the anniversary of 9/11, so I want to write a book about 9/11. But then there's a whole bunch of stuff I could write, right? I mean, I could have written about the Pentagon attack. I could have written about the plane that crashed in Pennsylvania, Flight 93. I could have written this from somebody in the South Tower or somebody who's outside the towers completely. There were many different angles on this I could take. So the first thing I do is I go to the library, shout out for librarians out there, and I check out a ton of books about what it is I want to write about. I bring them back here to my office. I sit down and I start reading books, and I read books for like 2-3 months. And I pour through those books and I take notes the whole time. And I'm looking for my story. I'm looking for scenes and things that I think would be really great to show in my book. For example, I'm reading about 9/11, and I see that in the Twin Towers, in both the South and North Tower, a lot of people were trapped in elevators. I told you there were like 99 elevators per tower. So the chances that you were in that building and in an elevator when one of those planes hit is pretty good, because that's how you got around. So there are many, many stories about people who were trapped in elevators after a plane hit their building in the World Trade Center and having to survive to get out of that elevator. There were other people who did not survive. We don't know what their stories are, but I knew the stories of people who had survived from these elevators. And I thought, oh my gosh, being trapped in an elevator after one of the planes hits, that would be an incredible part of the story to show, a really intense part. And that is now a part of Ground Zero. When I was researching the story about Afghanistan, so then I said during the talk that I realized I needed to tell you what are some of the consequences of 9/11. So I thought, well, a big consequence is the war in Afghanistan. So let me start reading about that too and see if I have a story to tell there. And I found all kinds of stuff to write about there too. One small thing that I read about was, look, Afghanistan is a country that has been racked by war for a long, long time. They're a country that has been invaded over and over and over again for centuries. Just recently, before the United States invaded in 2001, they went through a very deadly civil war, which is how the Taliban came to power in the first place. Before that, they were invaded by the Soviet Union. But when Russia was called the Soviet Union, they invaded Afghanistan, and they had a long war there in the late 70s and 80s. And one of the things I read about was that that there are still relics and remnants of those former wars in Afghanistan. So like there are still Soviet tanks that are like bombed out and half buried in the sand. And you know what the kids do with them? They use them as playground equipment, because they don't have playground equipment of their own. So they get up on the tanks and they climb around and they play around on the tanks. The tanks don't work anymore. There's no danger. They don't shoot and they don't drive, but the kids use them as playground equipment. And I was like, wow, what an incredible way to show how these kids are born into war and they live with war, right? These kids are born into the war in Afghanistan right now. Their parents might have been born into the Civil War. Their grandparents could have been born into the war with the Soviet Union. These are families that have known nothing but war. And what better way to show that than kids who are so comfortable with it? Well, not comfortable, so used to it, let's say, that they use tanks as their playground equipment, right? So that's a scene in the book. So I do all this research, I collect all these scenes, and I start to think, okay, now I think I have enough scenes to make a book. Then I go to my big outline board. This board is where I outline all of my stories. Every one of those note cards up there will turn into a chapter in a book. Right now, I'm working on a brand new book. And so I don't have a ton of cards up there, but I've started putting things up. And you can see they're kind of in weird places because I know I have other cards that will fill in gaps eventually that I just don't know the scenes for. Still doing research, still collecting scenes for those things. Got the beginning a little bit set, but I still have some holes over here to figure out. That's okay. This is a part of the process. I figure out those holes. I build my outline. When all that's done, then I'm finally ready to write my book. The whole process of researching and outlining takes me sometimes 4 months to do, and I haven't written a word of the book yet. Then I write the book. I write a first draft, and then I wish I was done. Ooh, that would be awesome. But then I send it off to my editor, and she reads it, and then she sends me notes back, and I rewrite it, and we go back and forth for a bunch of drafts until we both think that it's done. And the whole process takes about 1.5 years. So going from raw idea, like just I want to write a book about 9/11, to the book that you guys can read right now that you have in your hands, a lot of you guys, Ground Zero, it takes a long time and a lot of work. It's work I love, but it does take a long time. So a long answer to a short question. But hopefully that was some cool stuff. So thank you, Kevin. Let's see. The name on this one's hidden. Paul asks, What was your favorite part of Ground Zero? That's a good question. I think in general, one of my favorite things was learning about Afghanistan and its people. I knew that we were at war in Afghanistan as the United States, but I didn't really know much more about it besides that war angle. And to be able to write Reshmina's character and her family, I had to learn a lot more about the way that people in Afghanistan live today. And I really enjoyed diving into her life, to the world of Afghanistan, Eastern Afghanistan in particular, and reading about them and doing that. One of my favorite things I discovered was that in this region, the Pashtun region of Afghanistan, there is something called Pashtunwali, and Pashtunwali is a sort of a way of living. It's a set of morals and codes that people are raised with, and they use these to help decide how they're going to behave. And one of those is this idea that if somebody needs help, if somebody comes to you asking for help, you have to give it to them, that you're honor bound under Pashtunwali to help. So when Reshmina finds a wounded soldier and he's like, help, I need help, she knows this is going to be huge trouble for her family and her village. She knows this is going to be like the start of all kinds of trouble. But Pashtunwali says, if somebody asks you for help, you help them. And so she's got this big debate. Do I put my family at risk, or do I do what I think is right and help this person, even if it means that my whole world could be blown apart by dragging us into this? I really loved learning about Pashtunwali. It has some good stuff like that. It also has some stuff that's bad. If you've ever read I Am Malala, Malala talks about the idea of Badal. And Badal is actually part of Pashtunwali. And it is the idea that if anybody slights you or insults you, you have the right of revenge, and you can take your revenge anytime. Like, you have years and years and years to get revenge. But if anybody slights you in any way, you have the permission to get back at them and take your revenge on them. Well, Malala has asked, and I think rightly so, I think it's a question all of us should ask. It's not just for people who follow Pashtunwali. When do you stop? Right? If you say an eye for an eye, right? If you took my, I'm going to take yours. Well, if everybody did that, you've heard the expression maybe, an eye for an eye leaves everybody blind. Because eventually, if I hurt you and you hurt me, then I get to take revenge on you for hurting me, and you get to take revenge on me for hurting you over and over and over again. It never ends. And a lot of people like Malala are asking, when does the cycle of violence end? How do we stop it? And I ask similar questions in Ground Zero as well. So one of my favorite things was learning more about Afghanistan and Pashtunwali, which was fascinating. I did not know about it, much about it before I began researching Ground Zero. Thank you, Paul. Awesome question. So I got a question from Soraya. I'm hopefully saying your name right, Soraya. Forgive me if I'm not. Is it hard writing a book? And if so, why? Yes. It's not like I'm out, digging trenches. So it's not physically hard, thankfully. But there are parts of it that are not easy, let's say. I love doing the research, and I love building my story up here on the big board. That still is hard because it doesn't just come to me, boom, like magic. I have to fit all these pieces together, but it's still fun because it's like a puzzle that I get to piece together. And I really, really enjoy writing the first draft. So my books are like 275 pages, but I love writing 275 pages because I don't have to sit down and do that in one day. I sit down one day, I'm like, all right, if I can get 5 pages written, that's awesome. And then over the course of time, I have a 275-page book. My least favorite part of writing a book, though, by far, is the revision process. I can't stand it. Okay, so imagine that, imagine taking the last thing you wrote for English class and having to rewrite that over and over and over again for 2 whole school years. Does that sound like a lot of fun? Yeah. You're probably a lot of you out there screaming no at your computers right now. If you said yes, and you're not kidding, you're a potential future novelist. If you said no, that's okay. You guys just keep reading them, and we crazy people will keep writing them because it takes a lot of work. That's probably like, out of that year and a half I talked about, it's probably like a full year of rewriting. Sometimes it's taking the first draft and almost wholly rewriting it. So, but then by the end, I'm not rewriting the whole book. By the end, by like 7th or 8th draft, I might be just working on one chapter over and over and over again to get it right. But man, does that nitpicky stuff drive me bonkers. I can't stand it. But I know I have to do it because any little thing that's wrong will pull you out of the story. And so I know that revising it and getting it perfect, or at least as close as I'm going to get, is the way to get the best book possible. And when I look back at my first drafts, I'm like, oh, I thought this was so good and it was terrible. So I know that my books get 1,000 times better, but it's still my least favorite part of the process. Love the research, love the outlining, love the writing of the first draft, hate the revision. So that's the hardest part. Is it hard overall? Yeah. I mean, you're writing like a 275, 300-page book. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And it takes a lot of discipline to keep coming back every day and not be like, ooh, I want to start a new book, or I want to do something else fun. I want to sit and play my Switch or my Xbox. I can't do that. I got to get back to work and find that same enthusiasm I had for it. Cool. Thank you, Saria. And I'm glad I said it right. Or maybe I said Soraya last time. Now I've messed it up at least once. Thank you, though, for your great question. Tyler asked another question. How long did it take me to write this book? A year and a half. Nathan asks what inspired me to write about 9/11. So the anniversary, for one, I definitely wanted to write about Ground Zero for this year, about 9/11 for this year. But a lot of you guys, a lot of young readers had written to me to ask about it. And I started thinking about why. I was like, why are middle schoolers in particular like so fascinated by 9/11? And I started doing some math and I was like, oh, wait, like none of you guys were alive during 9/11, which is obviously when you do the math. But like for me who lived through it, and for most adults, we think of it not as history, but as something that happened in our lifetimes, right? I mean, it's like for you guys, one day COVID is going to be history for a new generation, but you guys lived through it. You know what the world was like during all this. And so it's not going to be history to you. It's going to be part of your life. But the next generation is going to be like, hey, Dad, tell us about COVID, you know? And so my daughter is 18 years old. She is a freshman in college this year. And she was born in 2002, the year after 9/11. So my daughter, who is as old as she's in college already, she was born after 9/11. I was like, oh, wow. Okay. So everybody who's in elementary school, everybody who's in middle school, everybody who's in high school, pretty much, you were born after 9/11, or you were so little that you barely remember it if you're in 18 years old in high school or something. But wow. So it was like, okay, now I get why so many young people want to know more about 9/11. For some of the reasons I talked about, adults don't like to talk about it. Also, you didn't live through it. So it's like, this is a historical event to you in a way. It might as well be, like the World War II because it happened before you were born, even though it was 75 years separated from those two events. So I wrote it for you guys. I wrote it to tell you what happened that day and to show you, because you also live in the world that has been created after 9/11. And I want to show you a little bit about what the world was like before it and how things changed and why they did. So hopefully it answers a lot of your questions and is also a book that you just can't put down. So thank you for that, Nathan. How long does it take me to do the research for my books? Maddie asks, usually 2 to 3 months to do the book research the first time around. Then I'm building this outline or kind of at the same time or a little bit after I do the research. And then I often have to go back and do another round of research to fill in some of those blanks when I'm like, oh, wait, I need to know about this. And I didn't read enough about that. And so I have to go back and do it. So Montrell asks, where do you come up with your ideas and where do you go to do research? So I get my ideas from all over the place. Once you're an author, your idea radar is kind of always on and looking for stuff. So sometimes it's a person I meet. Prisoner B3087 and Grenade are both based on people that I met. Prisoner is based on the true story of a guy named Jack Gruner, who as a kid survived 10 different Nazi concentration camps during World War II. It's an incredible true story. And I worked with him to tell that story. It's still a novel, but I worked with Jack to tell that story. Grenade is based on, I got to go to Japan a few years ago. And while I was there, I met an older man who'd been a kid on the island of Okinawa during World War II, during the Battle of Okinawa, which was the last major battle of World War II fought between the United States and Japan. And he told me an incredible story. He said the day that the United States invaded his island to try and take it from Japan, he and all the other middle school boys were pulled out of school by the Japanese army, and the Japanese army gave each of them a grenade. And they said, go off into the forest and don't come back until you've killed an American soldier with your grenade. And that's the very first chapter of Grenade. And what my kid does with that grenade is the rest of the story. But both of those ideas came from people I met and started talking with. So talk to people. If you're a writer out there, talk to people, listen to them, hear their personal stories. Think about how it could inspire you to tell a story like that. Sometimes it's a podcast I'm listening to or somebody else's book. Now, I don't want to copy somebody else's story. But one time I was reading a book and it mentioned the Hitler Youth. And I was like, oh, I could do a whole story about a kid who's a spy in the Hitler Youth. And that became Project 1065. Or I'm watching the news and I'm seeing big stuff that's happening, like the refugee crisis in Syria. And I thought, oh my gosh, I want to write a book that shines a light on that to bring more attention to those folks and to maybe help them out. That's where, one of the inspirations behind Refugee. Sometimes it's a date. Like the anniversary of 9/11 or the anniversary of D-Day, which inspired allies. So my books come from all kinds of different ideas and places. And I've got lots more ideas besides. I've got notebooks full of ideas waiting to write, just looking for when I'm most excited about them. That was a great question, Montreal. Thank you. Madeline says, if you could make a part 2, would you make one? Like a sequel to Ground Zero. I don't think so. I don't do sequels usually. Like most of my books are what you'd call standalone. You read that one book and that's it. You don't have to keep reading another book to find out the rest of the story. But I get a lot of readers who write to me and say, oh, we want to know what happens to Jack after Prisoner. We want to know what happens to Michael after Project 1065 or Cameron after Code of Honor. And I get it. I know you guys want to see like the continuing adventures of these characters. And people are like, what happens next? And I'm like, I don't know. I didn't write that book, so I don't know what happens in their life. They're not real people. For Jack, I could tell you, he fought in the Korean War and he came back home and he had raised a family and started a business. And the Korean War might be an interesting story to tell, although he didn't do much fighting in the Korean War, though he was there and of course in a war, and so it was dangerous. But anyway, I don't usually write the continuing stories. I kind of feel like a novel is the most exciting thing that happens to a character, to a person or a character, right, in their life. They're going to go on and have a really interesting life after that. And they may have had an interesting life before it, but the time of the book is the most intense, hardest challenge they will ever go through in their entire life. And so I kind of feel like if I wrote another book about that character, would it ever be as big? Would it ever be as important what they go through, or not important, but like as intense? Would it ever be as meaningful as what they went through? It could still be really incredible. And we have lots of movies and books with sequels where they continue to do amazing stuff. But for me, I kind of throw it all into one book and then say like that's it. I hope that life is easy for this character after that, because that was pretty darn tough. So I don't think I would do a sequel to Ground Zero. Sorry. I hope that the one book will satisfy. Good question, though, Madeline. How much money do I make selling these books? Tatum asks. I'm a billionaire. I fly around in my gold-plated jet. That is not true. That is not true. I make a living. This is my full-time job. And so I know I don't want to talk about exact money because nobody wants to talk about exact money. That's all personal. But I don't mind when people ask me if I make a living as an author, because when I was a kid, I wanted to grow up and be a writer. And I went to school, like I told you guys, to learn to be a writer. And they taught me how to write, but they didn't tell me how to make any money at it. They didn't tell me how to have a career at being a writer. I had to figure that out on my own. And so I always want to be really honest and upfront with people and tell you it's hard. Like, you don't get paid a lot for books right out of the gate. And I don't know if you guys know, so books usually cost like $18. The author doesn't get all $18 of that. Usually the author gets, wait for it, about $1.50 of that $18, right? And that's before taxes and my agent takes her money out and that sort of thing. So you got to sell a whole lot of books to make money as an author. It's possible. And you can sell just enough books to have a good career. By about 10 years into, well, maybe 5 or 10 years into my career, I was making as much as I did as a teacher, which was my former day job. I was an 8th grade English teacher. All the teachers in the audience are going, well, that's pretty easy because we don't get paid very much either. So, but you can make a living at writing books, and that's what I get to do for a living. And so as long as it helps, as long as it pays the bills and I can keep doing it, it's a win-win for me. So not super rich. Sorry. I know everybody thinks the authors must all be super rich. Not everybody's Jeff Kinney or Dave Pilkey or anybody like that, or Raina Telgemeier, who are household names. I wish they have awesome books too. So Addison asks, since I enjoy writing, do I enjoy reading? This may have to be our last question because I realize we're running out of time. Yes, I love to read. So here's the secret, though. I didn't read a ton when I was a kid. Maybe you don't read a whole lot now. Maybe you like to read, but you don't make a lot of time for it. And that was kind of me as a kid. I was also playing video games and playing with my toys and action figures when I was little, and going outside and building forts. And I was also writing. I was coming up with like fake countries and building like fake constitutions and maps and things for fake countries. But I read books, but I just didn't read a ton. And I wish now I had, because now that I'm an adult and I'm super busy, I wish I had all that time to go back and read all those books. But I didn't have my nose buried in a book the way that my wife did when she was growing up. So I would say that now I'm a much bigger reader than I was when I was a kid. So if you're not a reader, it's okay, but keep at it. I mean, like, don't give up on it. If you feel like you don't like to read, it's, I think, because you just haven't found the right book yet. And that's what it kind of was for me. I had to find the books that I loved. And now I'm trying to write those books. I'm trying to write the kind of books that I would have loved when I was a kid. So I hope that you love Ground Zero and all my other books, and that they keep you reading. But now, yeah, I'm an avid reader. I read every day, and just love it. I wish I had a lot more time for reading now. Well, listen, I think we got to wrap up the questions, because we are almost to the top of the hour, and I want to make sure we get Angie back and say goodbye. So we're going to close. I'm going to close the questions down while we get Angie up here and say goodbye. While we're doing that, I want to give you a reminder about that button down there at the bottom. You click on that, it takes you to the Country Bookshop's website. There's a copy of Ground Zero right there. Thank you, Vanna White, for showing that off. If you click on that button, it takes you to their website. You can buy a copy of Ground Zero. You can buy a copy of one of my other books, but you can help support an amazing, amazing bookstore in Southern Pines, the Country Bookshop. Angie.
And for the next week, everything except Ground Zero is 20% off. Just as an incentive to dig into Alan's backlist. Listen to that. Special deal. That's even better. That's awesome. Angie, thank you so much for the invitation. Alan. Oh, my pleasure. The questions were great. Thanks to our middle schools that you invited, Elisa Middle School, Uwharrie Academy, Scotland County Schools. And thank you to everybody from all over the country and all over the world who tuned in with us. I hope you guys have had a great time with us. Angie, I hope I can get back down there and see you soon. I hope so too. We're always glad to have you here. Yep. I can't wait. In the meantime, enjoy the nice weather that is there, because I am not there. Because I bring storm clouds wherever I go. And I hope that you guys are all staying safe as well. I hope the folks in Texas are doing well and getting your power back and staying warm. For everybody, just as a quick reminder, of course, we're still in the pandemic. And I know you're all being super smart. Keep wearing those masks. Keep washing your hands. Keep staying separated. Yep, Angie's got hers. I don't have mine handy because I'm in my own house, but she's at the bookstore, so she's got hers handy. Stay smart. Things might get worse before they get better. We got a handle on things now, and so we're doing better. But you guys are probably not as susceptible to it, just like me. But your parents, your grandparents, other people in your lives are. So be smart, be safe, and I hope you guys will keep reading too. So thank you very much. My pleasure. Thank you, Angie. Bye, guys. Have a great week.